Okay, today we're going to talk about cellular energy. Our objective is describe the purpose of photosynthesis and describe the purpose of cellular respiration. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are the chemical processes that allow organisms to transform matter and energy from the environment into usable forms. These two processes are essential to the function of all ecosystems by continuing to cycle matter and energy between organisms and the environment. There are two types of organisms we will be discussing, autotrophs and heterotrophs. The term autotroph breaks down into auto, meaning self, and troph, meaning new nourishment. Autotrophs are able to provide their own nourishment or food, but this only happens with the energy provided by the sun through the process of photosynthesis. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, are organisms that must gain nourishment from other sources. That is, they must consume their nourishment. Ecosystems are dependent upon many different types of energy. The law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but can be transformed. This is why the sun is considered to be the beginning source of all energy on Earth. Light energy from the sun may seem insignificant, but it's vital for fueling the process of photosynthesis. All right, organisms constantly need to convert energy in order to survive. Plants and animals have developed very different ways of addressing their energy requirements. However, all organisms rely on converting energy to a usable form. ATP is a molecule that is made up of three parts, adenine, ribose, and three phosphate molecules. The figure below shows how the energy carried by ATP is made available when the bond between the second and third phosphate is broken. As a phosphate group is released, the molecule becomes adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. ADP is a lower energy molecule that can easily store energy by adding an additional phosphate group. Remember that glucose, although considered a biomolecule for energy, is only the reactant to help our body produce the energy needed, ATP. Our diets are usually composed of a combination of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Each of these biomolecules can be broken down into varying amounts of ATP. Carbohydrates are the molecules that can most easily be broken down to make ATP. Carbohydrates are polymers made of simple sugars such as glucose, and one glucose molecule can provide an organism with approximately 36 ATP molecules. Chemiosynthesis. So a small group of organisms can convert a different molecule into ATP to power their cellular processes. These organisms carry out a process called chemiosynthesis. Chemosynthesis uses chemicals such as sulfides rather than using sunlight. Organisms that carry out chemosynthesis often live in places that receive little to no sunlight. These organisms are similar to plants in that they can make their own food, however, the inputs for the reaction are different. Photosynthesis is a chemical process that autotrophs use to transform light energy into stored chemical energy in the form of glucose. Autotrophs are often called producers because they're able to produce their own food. The sun is a major source of light energy. However, many autotrophs can use artificial sources of light to perform photosynthesis as well. Plants and other photosynthetic organisms use carbon dioxide and water from the environment and light energy to synthesize glucose and oxygen. Either directly or indirectly, all organisms in an ecosystem rely on the sun as an energy source. Photosynthesis is a complex process that takes place within the chloroplast of plant cells. The chloroplast is an organelle that contains chlorophyll, a pigment that absorbs light. Most chloroplasts are found in the leaves of plants that are best placed to gain maximum exposure to the sun. The process of photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, light, and water. All these reactants are found within the plant's environment. Water is absorbed by the roots of the plant, and carbon dioxide enters the plants through small holes in the leaves called stomata. Light is absorbed by the chloroplasts in the leaves. When plants have these reactants, they will produce glucose and oxygen. Plants store glucose made by photosynthesis and release oxygen into the environment. The full chemical reaction for photosynthesis is below. Carbon dioxide, CO2, plus water molecule H2O in the presence of sunlight, so we need light energy, can produce glucose plus oxygen. While the process of photosynthesis may seem very simple when we look at the reactions and products, in actuality, it's a complex process. Two different reactions are required for photosynthesis, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction, also known as light and dark reactions. In light-dependent reactions, light photons, or units of light energy, are absorbed and converted to ATP. This takes place in thalkaloids, a series of flat stacked discs located in chloroplasts. Thalkaloids are bound inside a thalkaloid membrane along with the green pigment chlorophyll. Chlorophyll gives green plants their characteristic color. When light energy hits the thalkaloid membrane, it is used to excite electrons in the photostems and to split water. When the water molecules are split, the oxygen diffuses into the atmosphere. The electrons enter the electron transport chain, and the hydrogen ions exit the thalkaloid membrane, where they are picked up and transported to the Calvin cycle on NADPH, a carrier protein molecule. In the light-independent reactions, carbon dioxide and the products of the light-dependent reaction, ATP and NADPH, our carrier molecule, undergo a series of reactions known as the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle produces glucose as its end product. The combination of the light-dependent and light-independent reactions result in the overall equation for photosynthesis. Now, glucose is available to be converted into the energy needed for cellular processes in the autotroph. Glucose contains chemical energy found in the bonds of the molecule. This energy can be released when these bonds are broken and new molecules are produced. Glucose must now go through an additional process to release that stored energy into a usable form for the organism. Remember, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only moves between one place and another place, between objects and fields, or between systems. The energy transferred from the sun cannot be destroyed. It can be transferred or transformed through chemical reactions such as photosynthesis. Now, cellular respiration is a chemical process used by autotrophs and heterotrophs to break down glucose molecules into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP is the main energy source for living organisms. This process occurs in the mitochondria of cells. Here's our mitochondria here. Cellular respiration can be aerobic or anaerobic. When oxygen is present, it is an aerobic process. This is the ideal process for organisms to access the most ATP from one glucose molecule. Aerobic cellular respiration, the first step is known as glycolysis. During this process, glucose enters the cell, while in the cytoplasm, glucose is broken down into two 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. Although the cells use some ATP to begin glycolysis, the overall process produces more ATP than it was used to initiate. For each molecule of glucose that enters glycolysis, a net of 2 ATP molecules are generated. After glycolysis, the remaining 2 steps of aerobic respiration take place in the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells, so glycolysis into the mitochondria here. Next is the Krebs cycle. The 2 pyruvic acid molecules, pyruvate, formed during glycolysis move into the mitochondria, where they initiate a series of enzymatic reactions that release electrons and hydrogen ions, and they produce carbon dioxide and 2 molecules of ATP. The carbon dioxide diffuses out of the mitochondria. The electrons and hydrogen ions are carried to the electron transport chain on NADH, a carrier protein molecule similar to NADPH. There we go. Electrons are carried to the electron transport chain. Products from the Krebs cycle move across the inner membrane of the mitochondria. This is called the electron transport chain because electrons are shuttled back and forth across the inner mitochondrial membrane as part of this process. At the end of the electron transport chain, a process known as oxidative phosphorylation takes place. Here, the enzyme ATP synthase adds phosphate to ADP, creating approximately 32 ATP molecules per glucose in the process. With just one glucose molecule, aerobic respiration yields 36 net ATP molecules after the processes of glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Quick summary, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are how organisms harness energy from the sun. Thanks for watching and good luck.